Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. We're picking up our conversation with national security reporter at McClatchy Newspapers' Washington Bureau, Tim Johnson. He worked on the latest McClatchy piece titled Creating Far-Off Companies with Few Questions Asked. Thanks so much for being with us, Tim.
You're welcome, Jessica.
So, Tim, the piece really centers around these middlemen who you guys describe as being the link for the rich to offshore servicers, like the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca. You specifically identify one individual, Michael Alfred Del Vecchio. Tell us about how he operated as a middleman.
Michael Del Vecchio is a Mexican-American guy who grew, at least his early years, were spent in Mexico City. Went to university in Mexico. Then he joined the Air Force, enlisted in 1979, spent a good number of years in the Air Force and had rather delicate positions handling defense satellite systems, including on remote islands like Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean.
Okay, so then how does he get caught up in this whole world of offshore companies?
It's a very curious story, and I'm not certain that we know the full picture, but we found his history extraordinary. After leaving the Air Force, he gets a job with the Boeing, and so he moves to Europe and starts selling Boeing aircraft out of Madrid. And somehow he leaves Boeing in 2005 and very quickly gets into the offshore company's business, and very quickly becomes a rainmaker for Mossack Fonseca, this Panamanian law firm. And as the way we can count it, there's at least 200 offshore corporations that were set up by him for various clients. Now it gets interesting. Who are these clients, and why is he doing this? I mean, this is a guy who ostensibly was protecting U.S. secrets in the Air Force and also dealing, with one of the blue chip American companies, Boeing. He begins to set up offshore corporations in the online gaming industry, among other things, and with people who are convicted of organized crime. And one of these companies is Betcris out of Costa Rica. And exactly how Del Vecchio came in contact with these people is not really clear. He told my colleague, Marissa Taylor, who reported this story over the course of several months. At first, he kind of denied that he knew these people. He didn't want to call them clients, but in the emails in the Mossack Fonseca archives, he personally refers to them as his clients and himself as a financial advisor. So he played a critical role in bringing these people into the law firm and getting their offshore corporations, companies, trusts, foundations up and running.
Could he be in some legal trouble, Tim?
That's a good question. Generally, for instance, in the Swiss leaks investigation, the U.S. Treasury Department, Department of Justice, went after the banks. They went after the clients in the banks. But so far, the use of American law for extraterritorial purposes in foreign law firms or foreign intermediaries hasn't really happened. And this has been a big loophole that we've seen in these papers, is that these guys are setting up and selling these offshore companies without doing the due diligence. Everybody seems to shirk responsibility for who's supposed to do the due diligence about who the end users of these offshore corporations are. In fact, there's nothing really illegal about much of what they do. There's no international convention or anything else that requires either the law firms or the accountants or the intermediaries to do this, other than fear that they could be subject to criminal prosecution, generally by U.S. Department of Justice.
So, Tim, just so I'm clear, these advisors and service providers, they sort of take on the role of helping to shield the identity of the real owners of these offshore accounts. So doesn't that show us that the public really doesn't know that much about who is actually evading taxes, even if we have these millions of documents coming out of the Panama Papers?
Not only does the public not know about who's evading taxes, They don't know the provenance of the cash, the money that's flowing through these offshore corporations. It's a very different kettle of fish to have, someone who's wealthy who sets up one offshore corporation, say in the Caribbean, the British Virgin Islands, or in Panama, to do some sort of business deal, to a person who sets up a daisy chain of offshore corporations and foundations and trusts, which have no other intent but to distance the beneficial owner, the real owner of the money, from what assets are being held or what's being spent. It's clearly a technique to distance the real owner from that money.
All right, Tim Johnson joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome, Jessica.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.